I will- okay. Hello everyone. Once again, good afternoon, and welcome to this IAB Europe webinar TCF 101. The goal of this webinar is to present the transparency and consent framework. So just we can start straight away. Um, Sorry. I'm Gosia, I'm Privacy and Compliance Manager at IAB Europe, and today I will explain briefly what TCF is and how it works. This is the short agenda for today. In the first place, I will really briefly go over what TCF is, so that we have the general idea. Later on, how it functions. The next step would be to show the developments and adaptation, how to register, a bit more about our compliance program and the TCF resources. Sorry. So what is the transparency and consent framework? So basically, the TCF is a voluntary and open source standard that was launched in April 2018. And it was basically directed, the idea was how to help the third parties intermediaries, so-called vendors, that don't really have the access to the end user and need to rely on publishers to how collect the consent on their behalf. So right now the TCF is directed to three different categories of stakeholders: the publishers, vendors, and CMPs. And TCF aims at facilitating the compliance with certain EU privacy and data protection laws for these stakeholders that we encompass in the TCF. But also it was about ensuring that transparency can be improved towards the end user and provide them with a better control over their personal data. So in a nutshell, TCF helps the publishers to obtain the e-privacy consent and establish the GDPR legal basis for the third-party vendors by informing the end users visiting their website about the data processing operations that are happening there and for which purposes and which legal basis the vendors collect the consent. And now I will go a bit more how it functions. Also because, sorry, I forgot to mention at the beginning, the webinar is recorded, and also at the very end, there's a Q&A session. So if you have any question in the meantime, please feel free to write it on the chat. And then at the end, I will just go back to them and answer. So it's not like your question will be forgotten, just there's a separate time slot at the end foreseen for that. Sorry for this interruption. So now how TCF functions. Um, so basically, when it comes to TCF, we have two really important pieces of documents. One is the TCF policies that explain about what participants can do and cannot do, explain also what we meant, for example, by certain terms. For example, explains what a vendor is, what the consent management platform, CMP, is as well. And in order to implement it in real life, there are technical specifications that are aiming to implement the policies from the technical point of view. And technical specifications are the open source specifications that are on the GitHub. And then based on that, the TCF participants can ensure that they are implemented correctly. And I will explain also later in the presentation the three pillars of the TCF that we have. But as I mentioned at the beginning, TCF is the minimum standard. So it is based on the three pillars that aim on standardizing some certain issues. So first pillar is about the standardization of information and choices to the users. Second is to standardize on how the user choices are captured. And the last pillar is about how the information about user choices is transferred further in the digital advertising chain. So it's about the standardization, basically. But once again, I really would like to underline that it's about the minimum standard that we have. So we try to find a common ground when it comes to the minimum standards that are common for the participants. And TCF also contains the taxonomy of different TCF purposes. And by purposes, we mean the taxonomy that right now has 11 different purposes. And each purpose is for different type of data processing activities within the digital advertising ecosystem. And it's ordered to standardize all types of data processing purposes that are common in the digital space. But what is also really important to mention that TCF can be used not only for advertising purposes, because how can you see in the table, we have the purposes that are more focused on advertising, but also on content. So we actually do have quite many vendors that use TCF not for the advertising, but some other activities related to the content. And more or less right now it's half-half, I would say. Yeah, and each purpose is allowed to be pursued with certain legal basis. Not each purpose can be used with legitimate interest. Right now, under the TCF, the purposes related to personalized advertising cannot be used with legitimate interest. So just flagging that. And also each purpose, it contains the vendor guidelines, which means that this guidelines explains the purpose of this purpose, like in a sense that for which purposes the vendor can use this purpose and what was the goal of this purpose. So that when you would like to register to the TCF, then if you go to the TCF policies, the purposes are disclosed there. You can read the vendor guidelines and you can assess whether this purpose works for you or not and whether you would use it. So it's really helpful. And also each purpose contains the user-friendly text, which is for the user to understand better about what vendors are doing. And this user-friendly text is later on displayed in the content management platform UI. And right now we will go to the pillars of the TCF. As I mentioned, it's about the standardization. So first pillar, it's about standardization of information and choices about vendors. So each vendor, while register, it needs to provide certain information during registration process. In particular, a vendor needs to provide the information, select the purposes they want to use within the TCF and the legal basis they also would like to base it on. But not only, we also ask vendors to provide the minimum data categories or cookies duration. And later on, this information is displayed in the global vendor list. It's a centralized public transparency register and is hosted by us. So once the vendor provides all the information, then this information is transferred to this GVL list. And later on, this global vendor list is used by the publishers and CMPs to build the CMP UI. And also from the publisher point of view, it's really important to see based on that with which vendors they would like to work with. But each vendor needs to provide certain information so that it's also standardized. And this information later on also in a standardized way displayed in the CMP UI. So it's also easier for the user to understand. And TCF also requires minimum UI requirements that are based on the DPA guidelines, such as consent cannot be checked by default, and certain information has to be disclosed to the end user. So it's the first pillar. It's about the standardization of what information is provided by vendors and later on displayed to the user to ensure the greater transparency. Next pillar is about standardization of how user choices should be captured. And it is done by the use of the so-called TC string. And TC string is the binary format string where the user choices are recorded and based on about each purpose and each vendor. So when the user interacts with the CMP UI, then user makes the decision about to which vendors and purposes she or he agrees to, and then the TC string is created, and it contains the standardized information, such as whether the certain vendor was given consent or not, and for which purpose. And the string contains the 0 and 1s, so it's really abstract piece of information. And if there is 1, it means that the user gave its consent, and if it's 0, it means that there was no consent given. And in the TC string itself, we have several different information encoded. It's not about only the purposes and vendors, but for example, if a publisher decided to implement some restrictions, because I think it might be the question later. So even though we have sometimes we under the TCF, we allow vendors to use, for example, legitimate interest for certain purposes together with consent. Publishers are also free to implement on digital properties the requirement for vendors that uses the flexible legal basis to require from them to use, for example, consent only, because there are a lot of publishers that don't want to use legitimate interest on the digital properties. So it's also possible within the TCF, and then this information is also encoded in the TC string as well. And the third pillar is about standardization of how user choices should be communicated and respected. So as I mentioned at the beginning, really huge part of the TCF are the technical specifications. So each vendor and each TCF participants understand the communication within the framework so that they know whether they themselves receive consent or not, and whether they can pass the string further to the next supply chain partner. And the TCF can be implemented both in the web environment, but also in the app environment. And the protocol the technical protocol, which is based on the technical specifications, explain how the supply chain has to forward TC string to the downstream partners through standard protocol for the integration. And it's also possible to have the server-to-server integration within the TCF. So it's really technical piece, but this piece ensures that with the standard that we have, that everyone can communicate with each other without any problems, and everyone understand the information that has been passed to a certain vendor or partner. And also the technical specifications are also based on data protection authorities guidelines. So we really were trying to ensure that what we create at least meet the minimum requirements, so that we have this common ground between our participants, because it's how it works. TCF is something that is trying to find the solution to make sure that each TCF participant is okay with what is settled. And I will tell you about it more in a moment. So now about the TCF development and adaptation. So when it comes to the governance, it is about what I've just said. TCF is developed in a way during the working groups that we have for TCF. And the working groups aim to make sure that the TCF itself is up to date when it comes to the data protection and privacy standards. And the decisions are actually taken by the weighted vote procedure between the different sides of ecosystem, so that each side of the stakeholder is represented by sales side, and based on that we take the decision. So it's more like really we try to make sure that the TCF participants really have the impact on how the TCF is developed. We have had some iterations, and right now the most current one is the TCF version 2.2, and this was updated in May 2023. And what was the biggest change? It was about, as I mentioned, that right now within TCF, it's impossible to use legitimate interest as a legal basis for providing personalized advertising. So it's also, I think, important to know. And TCF is adopted by more than 90% of publishers selling ads. And also right now we have more than 150 vendors and more than 150 CMPs for different environments. And by environments, I mean the web environment, but also within the apps or connected TV. And now a bit more about how to register if you would like to be interested. So basically, when it comes to the registration, vendors and consent management platform have to register and pay the annual fee, which right now it's 1,575 euro, and the fee is paid each year. The publishers are not obliged to register nor pay the fee, but they need to follow the certain TCF policies if they would like to have the TCF implemented on their digital properties. and they need to follow the requirements that are there and make sure, for example, that the CMP that is on the website, it also meets the TCF requirements. Also, when the vendor register, they need to provide certain information, as I mentioned. So by the registration portal that are later on disclosed in the global vendor list. When it comes to the CMPs, they need to submit the registration request and later on this need to pass the validation test. And in case you have any questions, feel free to contact one of these emails below. And I think the slides are going to be shared later, so you will have all the information provided. So if you would have strictly related registration questions, then please refer to the framework email. If it would be more complicated, technical or legal, then please TCF compliance mailbox would be better. And about the compliance programs that we have, we try to make sure that TCF is still, that the TCF participants follow the rules of the TCF so that each participant can trust each other, and we try to protect the integrity of the framework itself. So we have compliance programs for the CMPs and vendors where we check their compliance with the policies that they agreed to follow. And we have two different phases of the compliance programs, which one is pre-implementation process, which is happening before a vendor is CMP registered, and then post-implementation enforcement stage, which is about the fact that we each month audit randomly selected TCF participants to check their live installations, to see if they are compliant with TCF policies and the technical specifications. And the enforcement process depends on the type of the breach that the SCMP or vendor has done. And one of the enforcement procedure also foresee the suspension from the framework, so that if a certain vendor SCMP is not compliant, it's possible to suspend this TCF participant. And also, according to the TCF compliance program, we can also make a public announcement in a case that TC string has been tampered. So we do that in order to make sure that the TCF integrity is kept. So I think it's something really important to know, that we really try to make sure that TCF is the rules and that policies are followed. And now it's about the TCF resources. So I hope for now, I guess it's a lot of information and it's a bit probably complex or seems complicated. But we have several different resources that might help you to understand a bit more or better if you would like to go to the TCF more in details. So as I mentioned, we have the TCF policies, which consists of the rules for the TCF participants and how to understand them. Later on, the terms and conditions of the TCF, the technical specifications that are really important for your IT team in order to understand how the policies can be implemented from technical perspective. Global vendor list is just publicly available register about informations about vendors. But in order to read it properly, you need the browser extension because it's JSON file. So if you just go there and you don't have this extension installed, you might see really weird stuff. And we have several different translations also for the languages outside European Union. So if you know that you have a lot of clients from outside Europe and still would like provide them with the CMPUI of their native language, probably to be possible because we have quite many languages at this moment. And TCF supporting resources, I would say it's the best site to reference is a special tab on our website where you can find all the TCF related resources, issues. So you can go to the TCF supporting resources and see what TCF can offer and additional documents that can help you understand more in details how it works. And now it's the moment of the Q&A. So just I will see how many questions we have. Okay. It seems actually that for now no one has any questions, so I don't know if I don't see the box, but no, we have something. Okay, sorry, I had to jump a couple minutes late to the webinar. Is it possible to receive presentation by email? Yes, we will share the presentation by email with you. And same, the webinar has been recorded so that if you would like to come back later to this, it will be also possible. Question: can an advertiser join as a vendor? So let's say I cannot answer like that because I don't know the specific use case. But I think we have some. But then you would really need to see at the TCF purposes and see if any of them matches your current activity, because it's the whole thing that we cannot determine whether someone can join TCF or which purposes you would need to declare. It's up to you and your legal and technical teams to determine that. So I just really advise to go through the TCF purposes and see and just see if something is just within scope of your activity. But being the advertiser, it's not something that doesn't allow you to register to the TCF. It's about like checking if there's something within the purposes that matches your activity. Okay, we have more questions. If we develop our own ad tech solution for first-party targeting ads, it is needed to be registered vendor within IAB and defined purposes. Okay, I think it's like too broad question that I'm not sure I can answer. Again, as I said, as a vendor, you would need to look at the TCF purposes and see if after creating this solution, there would be something that you would be useful for you. But basically, then if, for example, it's a solution that allows the fraud detection, you could, the TCF still could be useful, because we have so-called special purposes for that. And then it would be just easier for your, let's say, fraud detection solution to obtain consent for, because still sometimes some the consent is requirement or just the disclosure. So it would be, for example, preventing from having several layers of the banner in this case. But again, I don't know this ad tech solution of yours. So I cannot answer properly this question. But just again, please go for the TCF purposes and then you can see. Okay, which are the applicable purposes TCF 2.4 per concept provided adds the user? It is applicable for podcast. I think we don't have actually the case with podcasts. It's more about the what is displayed on the website. So, for example, the content ones, I would need to go back to the presentation, but it was mostly the purpose. It was purpose 11, for example. Yeah, it was mostly purpose 11, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so I'm not sure we have any participant that use it for podcast, but to select the content on the website, yes. What is the advantage of have this? What is the advantage of having the TCF vendor verification? What make us different? Basically, some having a TCF, being registered as a TCF vendors, it's kind of well known by the publishers, or it means quite. Sorry, it's kind of like something that give you some additional proof that you want to provide the transparency to the end users, because as I mentioned before, the TCF also, it's not only useful for vendors, but the goal was also to make sure that from the user point of view, it's more clear how you, what type of processing operation you do, and to provide them with certain amount of information. So for example, in the GDPR, there are also some requirements that you need to disclose to the end user, and the TCF allows you to standardize it to provide all the info. And later on, it just allows you to provide in an easier standard way this information to the end user. and just to basically make sure that this required information or it facilitates your compliance with the GDPR. So it's this advantage of having some kind of like proof that you just want to make sure that also from the user point of view, the certain information has been displayed. How does a customer control how their data shared with multiple vendors? So it's about the controls in the CMP UI. Certain amount of information is displayed to the user, and they, by the controls, they can decide whether they provide consent for the certain vendor or purpose or not. So it is what we mean by providing the consumer with the control that they can decide, and also it's easier for them to understand the data processing operation because the information provided is just we are trying to make it more clear because as I mentioned, we have the user-friendly text so that they can understand more in detail what is happening with their personal data, and also based on the standardized way of passing the information. Once the user takes the action, it's just like passed in the standardized way. So just easier for the also vendors to understand certain user. Okay. Sorry, I just closing the questions that I answered. If I know as a vendor that we are not using some of the data, we just transfer the TC string, but we know that our partners do. Should we declare the purpose? So basically, TCF from the perspective, like legal perspective, is created for the data controllers, not for the data processors. If you want to, if you are the processor of someone, that you would need to check if this your main controller that you are processor for has certain consents. But again, I cannot answer this question because I don't know specific use case, because quite often still if we have a situation that a vendor who works as a processor register within the TCF, quite often they still disclose certain purposes. For example, the purpose one, which is storage the information on the user device, which is not GDPR purpose, but is e-privacy purpose. So quite often we have vendors that even they won't do themselves the data processing operations that are about processing personal data. Quite often they declared other purposes as well. But again, the assessment should be done with your legal team that knows better your exact use case. So I hope it helps. How does the TCF address the issue of cookie fatigue for users? So right now, actually, we are trying within the TCF group working groups to find some solutions on that, and it's just not easy question. Or I think there's no, let's say, perfect way to deal with that. What we want to do with the use of TCF to just make sure that the information is clear to the user, that the standard actually helps them to understand, because the same text, the same explanation is used in each TCF banner, so it's less confusing. And even our report has been already published about the attitude of consumers towards personal advertising. And when you go, it's available on our website. So if you would like to see the results, one of them is actually the fact that the user appreciate when the cookie banners are kind of similar. So there is kind of like a standard. So I would say indirectly we also address that by the fact that we really want to standardize the disclosures. But cookie fatigue is something that I think with the current legal framework is really difficult to just fight. And what we can do is only to make sure that the disclosures that we provide within TCF are understandable for the end users. What are some potential future trends or changes? What are potential future trends or changes we should anticipate in the TCF landscape? So we have several different working groups, and we are trying to follow different work tracks or how the data protection authorities sees the privacy landscape. So basically right now we are, for example, in one of the working groups thinking of how we can actually, or if we can somehow support the compliance with Article 26 of the DSA. it's one of the possible developments, or it's also one of the groups. It's focusing on the dark pattern issue. So we are trying to kind of make some difference, or are trying to also provide users with a better experience. So also this work track on the dark patterns is kind of important to us because we also have heard some good feedback on that from the data protection authorities. So yeah, for example, this too. How does the TCF address users' right to withdraw consent? How we can facilitate that? So basically, the requirement by the TCF is about one of the TCF requirements is to make sure that the user can withdraw consent in a as easy way as it was supposed to give it. So it's obligatory to make sure that it's not too difficult for the user to withdraw consent. And also in the initial layer of the CMPY, there's this requirement to inform the user about the fact that she can withdraw consent and also how to do so. And right now, maybe I think it was also indirectly the question about the perhaps reject all button, but it's not regulated by the TCF because there are still several different DPA guidelines. But there are like two, as I mentioned, two obligatory requirements for easy to make sure that the withdrawal consent is easy. Okay. Does TCF aim at having standards for consent or pay banners, context? Okay, so basically under TCF, the consent or pay models are allowed, but there are certain provisions within the policies that this type of installation need to still meet. So all of the TCF requirements are still applicable to such installations. And we don't plan right now any specific guidelines to this because, as also probably you know, the fact is that this consent or pay installations are handling differently in each country. If someone would like to, I can also send later the resources that we have on that. Because we cannot really make a common standard because in each country it's handled different. Also, right now, EDPB is working on the broader guidelines after their opinion about consent or pay models for the big online platform. Right now, they are working for the specific guidelines. And we are just also waiting for that and see what will be said there. But we also used to work or try to communicate to the authorities a lot about the potential issues for the industry with that. So if you go on our website, you can see, for example, our position paper on the consent or pay models or the feedback paper after EDPB stakeholders event about this issue. So we are engaged in that, but for now, TCF, it's not aiming to standardize it anyhow because it's too many different approaches on that, and we don't really know right now the proper answer to how actually handle that. But this type of installations are allowed. Okay. Would love the resources on this. Okay, so just I don't know if I can put my email, but then I think I can do it on the chat. Mm, okay. So yeah, I put on the chat my email so that if someone would be interested, I can send really short document on the pay or consent that we have. That it's kind of like summary of different countries how they approach this. But it's a really short one, so just like flagging that. Okay. What happens in a programmatic advertising auction if valid consent has not been obtained for a specific person when a hardware bid's filtered or rejected? So it should be this type of situation that this is string, like based on the technical specifications, a vendor should know that if the consent was not properly obtained, then they just need to reject this type of a string. So they should know that they cannot actually process with that further within the framework. Okay. Um, Okay, I will wait a few minutes to see if there are more questions. If not, then I think we could finish the webinar. So please feel free if you have anything more to be asked to drop the question. And also just from the marketing team, please see here there's the QR code about our upcoming events. Also in May, we have the biggest event organized by us, which is Interact. So I think if you are interested or involved in the digital advertising, it would be really helpful for you or interesting to join us. This year it's organized in Brussels. And I see one more question. How can you become involved with the okay, SG? I think someone either had in mind working group. But basically, if you want like to join one of the working groups, then you should join IAB Europe as a member. And for the several different groups, there are some certain rules. Okay, I have one more question. How does the TCF address the use of legitimate interest by vendors in programmatic advertising supply chain? What are implications for the publisher? So, as I mentioned, within TCF, there are certain purposes that can be used with legitimate interest as a legal basis, and some of them not. So, once this information is passed, from the TCF point of view, if you send this information within the TC string, you cannot use legitimate interest as a legal basis to provide personalized advertising. So it is this thing that I mentioned during the webinar. Yeah, there are some certain purposes that are allowed to be used under the framework of legitimate interest. But also when it comes to the publishers, within the TC string, there's a special so-called publisher segment. And then this segment, it's outside the framework, but you can actually use it for your custom purposes. So if you would like to kind of adjust some purposes by your own, you can do that, but then it's outside the framework. Just it's easier to pass this signal. But yeah, there are some stuff or certain purposes within TCF that cannot be used with legitimate interest, as I mentioned. Okay. So I don't see any more questions. So it's last moment to add them if you have some. Okay, I have one more. Uh, well, thank you. I mean, we can think about organizing the more sessions like that in the future, depending on the needs of the participants. Okay. So I think that's all. I don't see any more questions. So thank you very much for joining the webinar. And if you have any questions, please contact either myself or one of the marketing team colleague, or there's two emails that I provided, the TCF compliance mailbox on the framework one. So I think that's all. Thank you very much once again for joining, and have a nice afternoon.